What would you do if you understood every word your future in-laws were saying about you and your family, but they had no idea you spoke their language? And what if those private conversations revealed a conspiracy so shocking, so carefully planned, that it would completely destroy your daughter's fairy tale romance and expose the man she loves as one of the most dangerous criminals you could ever imagine? What if I told you that one dinner, one split-second decision to stay silent, and one night of careful listening saved my daughter from becoming victim number 47 in an international fraud scheme that had already stolen over $20 million and destroyed dozens of American families? My name is Margaret Collins, and I speak French fluently. I spent 4 years in Paris during college, lived and worked there for 2 more years after graduation, and for over 20 years since returning to America, I've religiously maintained my language skills. I read French literature, watch French films, follow French news, and sometimes even dream in French. But when my 28-year-old daughter Emma brought home her charming French fiancé Pierre Dubois and his sophisticated parents for what was supposed to be a warm family dinner, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I decided to pretend I didn't understand a word of French. What I overheard that evening in my own dining room will haunt me for the rest of my life. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the best thing a parent can do is let dangerous people think you're completely ignorant while you gather the evidence needed to save your child's life. This is the true story of how I discovered that my daughter's Prince Charming was actually a professional predator, and how a mother's intuition combined with hidden language skills exposed an international criminal network that had been destroying American women's lives for over 10 years. But to understand how we got to that terrible dinner, I need to tell you about Emma's journey to that moment and why she became the perfect target for these monsters. To understand why Emma was so vulnerable to Pierre's manipulation, you need to know about her romantic history and the emotional state she was in when he entered her life. My daughter had always been what I'd call careful with her heart, sometimes too careful. At 28, Emma was the embodiment of every professional achievement any mother could dream of. She worked as a senior marketing coordinator at Morrison and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious international consulting firms. She had graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University with dual majors in business administration and international relations. She spoke fluent Spanish, was studying Mandarin in her spare time, and had a detailed 5-year career plan that included making partner at her firm before she turned 30. Emma lived in a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a reliable Honda Civic that she'd paid off early, and had been diligently saving money and contributing to her 401k since her first day of work. She was responsible, ambitious, intelligent, and independent. On paper, she was thriving, but when it came to romantic relationships, Emma had faced one crushing disappointment after another, and each failure chipped away at her confidence in a way that broke my heart as her mother. There was Michael Richardson, the investment banker she'd dated during her senior year of college and for 6 months after. He'd seemed perfect at first, handsome, successful, from a good family. But after they'd been together for a while, Michael started making comments about Emma's intelligence and ambitions that bothered me. "You know, Em," he said at one dinner where I was present, "you might want to tone down the career woman talk around my colleagues. Some guys get intimidated when women get too aggressive about business stuff." "Aggressive?" Emma asked, clearly confused. I was just saying I was working on an interesting project. I know, babe, but maybe let me do more of the talking in professional settings. It would help my image to have a girlfriend who's supportive rather than competitive. Emma tried to accommodate him, but I could see how much it hurt her to diminish herself. The relationship ended when Michael told her point blank that he needed someone who would support his career without overshadowing it. Then there was James Morrison, no relation to her firm, an artist she'd met at a gallery opening. James seemed like the complete opposite of Michael in every way. He was sensitive, creative, interested in Emma's thoughts and opinions. He encouraged her self-expression and seemed genuinely impressed by her intelligence. But after 6 months of dating, James moved into Emma's apartment, supposedly temporarily while he figured out his living situation. The temporary arrangement turned into 8 months of James living rent-free in Emma's apartment while she paid for groceries, utilities, and even art supplies for his important creative work. When Emma finally asked James about his plans to contribute financially or find his own place, he accused her of being materialistic and crushing his artistic vision with capitalist concerns. "True love isn't about money, Emma," he said dramatically. "I thought you understood that art and creativity are more important than your corporate world." The relationship ended when Emma discovered that James had been using her credit card to buy expensive art supplies and telling his friends that he was managing a high-earning corporate girlfriend who supported his artistic career. But the relationship that really devastated Emma was with David Chen, not my husband David, but another David who worked in tech consulting. They dated for almost 2 years, and I genuinely thought he might be the one. David seemed to appreciate Emma's intelligence and drive. He had his own successful career, so hers didn't threaten him. They traveled together, had fascinating conversations about everything from politics to philosophy, and seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. Emma was so comfortable with David that she started talking about their future together. She mentioned the possibility of moving in together, maybe getting engaged, starting to build a life together. That's when David dropped the bombshell that shook Emma's confidence in herself, like none of the previous relationships had. "Emma, you mean the world to me," he said during a conversation that Emma thought was going to take their relationship to the next level. "But I've been thinking a lot about what I want in a life partner, and I've realized that I need to be the primary breadwinner in my marriage." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, confused. "I mean, I was raised with traditional values about gender roles in marriage. I need to be able to provide for my family, to be the head of the household financially. Your career is amazing, and I'm proud of your accomplishments. But if we got married, I'd want you to step back from work, maybe do something part-time, so I could be the provider." Emma was stunned. "David, I make more money than you do. I've been promoted twice since we started dating. Why would I give up my career?" "Because that's what partnership means to me. I can't feel comfortable in a relationship where the woman is more successful than I am. It's nothing personal, Emma. It's just how I'm wired." The breakup that followed was devastating to Emma, not because she loved David more than the others, but because she started to believe that maybe there was something wrong with her. Maybe successful, ambitious women like her were destined to be alone. Maybe she was asking for too much by wanting a partner who would celebrate her achievements rather than ask her to diminish them. "Mum," she said to me during a tearful phone call after the breakup, "am I too much? Should I pretend to be less so that men will want to be with me?" "Absolutely not," I told her firmly. Emma, you're extraordinary. The right man will see your intelligence and ambition as assets, not threats. Don't you dare settle for someone who asks you to make yourself smaller. But I could see how each rejection wore her down. Emma started working even more, throwing herself completely into her career to avoid the pain of dating. She stopped going to social events, stopped accepting setups from friends who wanted to introduce her to someone. She built walls around her heart that I worried might be too high for the right person to climb. So when Emma started talking about Pierre Dubois, 8 months after her breakup with David, I was immediately intrigued. For the first time in years, my daughter sounded genuinely excited about a man, but I was also worried. Emma's history of disappointments had made her vulnerable, though she might not have even realized it. She wanted so badly to find someone who appreciated her for who she was, that she might overlook red flags that would normally catch her attention. I had no idea how justified my concern would prove to be. Emma first mentioned Pierre Dubois during one of our weekly coffee dates at Café Luna, our favourite spot in Lincoln Park, where we'd been meeting almost every Saturday morning for the past 3 years. It was early October, about 6 months after her grandmother's death and inheritance. "Mum, I think I've met someone," she said, and there was something different in her voice, a lightness and excitement I hadn't heard since before her breakup with David. "Tell me everything," I requested, settling into our usual corner booth with my latte. His name was Pierre Dubois. He was French, originally from Provence, but had lived all over the world for work. He was currently in Chicago working as a consultant for his firm, Beaumont International. They worked with several American companies on strategies for expanding into European markets. Emma's eyes were literally sparkling as she talked about him, and I could see some of the protective walls she'd built around her heart starting to crumble. We met about 3 weeks ago at the coffee shop in my building. I'd just come back from a meeting with Grandma's lawyer about the inheritance, dealing with complicated tax issues around the estate, and I was feeling overwhelmed and sad. I was even crying a little, trying to hide it behind my laptop. She paused to sip her coffee, and I could see her reliving the memory with genuine warmth. Pierre was standing in line behind me, and when I picked up my coffee, I accidentally bumped into him and spilled some coffee on his jacket. I was so embarrassed, especially since I was already emotional, that I started apologizing profusely. But not only was he not angry, he was incredibly gracious about it. What did he say? He said, "Please don't worry about this, but I can see that you're upset about something much more important than coffee on my jacket. Are you okay?" And then he offered me his handkerchief. An actual cloth handkerchief, Mum, like in a movie. Emma's smile grew even brighter. We ended up talking for 2 hours. He missed a meeting and I was late to work, but neither of us cared. He listened so intently that I felt like the most interesting person in the world. "What did you talk about?" "Everything." I told him about Grandma, about how hard it was to lose her, and then deal with all the legal and financial complications. He told me about losing his grandfather, who was like a father to him. We talked about work, travel, books, art, wine. Emma leaned forward, her face animated. "Mum, he knows everything. Literature, history, economics, art. He's traveled to over 30 countries for work. He speaks 4 languages fluently. When we talk, I feel intellectually challenged in the best possible way." "He sounds very experienced. What kind of consulting does he do?" "International business development. specifically helping European luxury brands understand American consumer behavior. He's worked with fashion houses, wineries, art galleries, and premium tourism companies. His specialty is cultural bridge building, helping companies adapt their marketing and products to different cultural contexts. This sounded impressive and legitimate. And he's here temporarily? Yes. His assignment is for about 6 months. But Mum, here's what's amazing. He doesn't make me apologize for being smart or ambitious. When I tell him about my projects at work, he asks detailed questions and shares insights from his experience. When I mention my 5-year career plan, he doesn't look scared. He looks impressed. I could understand why Emma was so taken with Pierre. After years of men who found her success threatening, she'd found someone who seemed to celebrate it. I'd love to meet him sometime, I said. Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Pierre has been asking about my family and would really like to meet you and Dad. But there's something else. Emma's expression became more serious, and I saw a mixture of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. Mum, Pierre proposed to me. I felt like I'd been doused with cold water. What? When? Last night at this beautiful French restaurant, Le Bernardin. And he said he'd never felt about anyone the way he feels about me. He said that when you meet your person, you know it immediately, and that geography and timing don't matter when you find true love. The alarm bells in my head were ringing so loudly I could barely think. Emma, honey, 3 weeks is incredibly fast. I know, Mum, it seems rushed, but we've spent almost every evening together since we met. We've had lunch together every day at work. His firm is in the same building as mine. We've talked about everything. Childhood, dreams, fears, goals. I feel like I know him better than I knew David after 2 years. But marriage, Emma? What about his work? Won't he have to go back to France when his assignment ends? Emma's face grew serious. That's the complication. His company is transferring him back to Paris permanently in about 2 months. If we want to be together, we need to formalize our relationship so I can move to France with him. The visa process is complicated for Americans, but marriage makes everything much easier. All my maternal instincts were screaming that this was wrong. A rushed engagement, pressure to immediately move to another country, visa issues that could only be solved by marriage. It all felt like textbook manipulation, though I couldn't explain why. Emma, moving to another country is a huge decision. What about your job, your career plans, your life here, your family? I know, Mum, it's big. That's exactly why Pierre wants you and Dad to meet his parents before we make any final decisions. They're flying in from France next week specifically to meet our family. Pierre says family approval is incredibly important in French culture, and that he would never make a major life decision without making sure everyone felt comfortable. Despite my growing anxiety, this reassured me somewhat. At least Pierre seemed to understand the importance of family relationships and wasn't trying to isolate Emma from us. Where are they staying? In a hotel? Yes, Pierre booked them a suite at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. He said he wants them to be comfortable and independent while they're here, but close enough that we can spend a lot of time together. That's thoughtful and expensive. Pierre says his family is well off financially. His father owns vineyards in Provence that have been in the family for generations, and his mother taught literature at the Sorbonne before she retired. Pierre grew up in a very wealthy cultural environment, surrounded by art, literature, wine, and intellectual conversation. They sound wonderful, Emma. I'd be happy to meet them. Thank you, Mum. I knew you'd understand. Pierre is so nervous about meeting you and Dad because he knows how important family is to me. He wants to make the best possible impression. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Emma was glowing with happiness, and Pierre sounded like everything she'd been looking for in a partner. But the timeline was so accelerated, and so many major life changes were being proposed immediately. I decided I needed to do some research before meeting Pierre's parents. If Emma was going to move to France and marry this man, I wanted to know everything I could about them. I had no idea that this decision to investigate would ultimately save my daughter's life. That evening, after David had gone to bed, I sat down at the computer and began what would become several days of intensive research into Pierre Dubois and his family. What I discovered, or more accurately, what I failed to discover, started to worry me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I started with Pierre's LinkedIn profile, which looked legitimate at first glance. He was listed as a senior international business development consultant at Beaumont International, a Paris-based firm. His background showed an MBA from INSEAD, one of Europe's most prestigious business schools, along with previous positions at seemingly solid consulting firms in France, Switzerland, and Belgium. But when I tried to dig deeper into his work history, things became more troubling. The companies he listed as previous employers had virtually no internet presence. Beaumont International had a professional-looking website, but it contained surprisingly little information about specific services, client testimonials, or case studies. For a company that supposedly helped major European brands enter American markets, there was a startling lack of evidence of their actual work. I tried to find news articles or press releases mentioning Beaumont International's projects, but came up with almost nothing. This seemed strange for a consulting firm working with luxury brands. These kinds of partnerships usually attracted at least some media attention. Next, I searched for information about the Dubois family vineyard that Emma had mentioned. She said it was called Domaine Dubois, and that it was a small family winery in Provence that had been owned by the family for generations. But when I searched for French wineries with that name, I found almost nothing substantial. There was a simple website with beautiful photos of vineyards and wine bottles, but no detailed information about the winery's history, awards, restaurants that served their wines, wine critic reviews, or any of the other information you'd expect from an established French winery. The photos on the website looked professional, but something about them seemed generic. I decided to reverse search one of the images to see if it appeared elsewhere on the internet. My heart sank when the same photograph had been used by 3 different wine-related websites, suggesting it was a stock photo rather than an actual picture of the Dubois vineyard. I spent hours trying to find any mention of Marcel Dubois in connection with French wine, Provence vineyards, wine publications, anything that might give me additional information about Pierre's father. I found nothing. I tried the same approach with Brigitte Dubois and the Sorbonne. I searched faculty directories, both current and archived, academic publications, conference materials, anything where a literature professor by that name might be mentioned. Again, nothing. Maybe their internet presence was just limited, I thought. Not everyone leaves a significant digital footprint, especially older French academics and small vineyard owners. But the complete absence of any verifiable information was starting to seem more significant than simple privacy preferences. I decided to take a different approach. I called my friend Catherine Moreau, who had stayed in Paris after we finished college 25 years ago. Catherine now worked as a senior journalist at Le Figaro, one of France's most respected newspapers, and had extensive connections in France's business, academic, and cultural circles. Catherine, this is Margaret Collins calling from Chicago. I hope I'm not calling too late. Margaret, what a wonderful surprise. Not too late at all. I'm just finishing up work. How are you? How's Emma? We're both doing well, thank you. Actually, I'm calling about Emma. She's engaged to a Frenchman, and his family is coming to visit us next week. I was hoping you might be able to help me find some information about them. Of course. I'd be happy to help. What are their names? The family name is Dubois. Pierre Dubois is Emma's fiancé, and his parents are Marcel and Brigitte Dubois. Pierre says his father owns a vineyard in Provence called Domaine Dubois, and his mother was a literature professor at the Sorbonne. Dubois is quite a common surname in France, but let me see what I can find. I have good connections at the Sorbonne, and I know several wine critics and industry specialists who would know about Provence vineyards. Could you give me a day or two to make some calls? That would be incredibly helpful, Catherine. I really appreciate it. Margaret, may I ask why you're checking up on them? Is something wrong? I hesitated, trying to phrase my concerns without sounding paranoid. Maybe nothing serious. I'm probably just being an overprotective mother. The engagement happened very quickly, and Emma is being asked to move to France immediately. I want to make sure she's making the right decision with full information. I completely understand. Better to be cautious when it comes to your daughter's future. Give me 48 hours, and I'll tell you everything I can find. Thank you again, Catherine. This means a great deal to me. After hanging up, I felt both relief at getting professional help and growing anxiety about what that help might reveal. 2 days later, Catherine called me back with information that made my blood run cold. Margaret, I have the information you requested about the Dubois family, but I'm afraid it's not what you were hoping to hear. What did you find? I found no record of Marcel Dubois owning a vineyard in Provence. I spoke with 4 wine critics who specialize in Provence wines, contacted regional wine authorities, and even checked with the official Provence wine appellation authorities. There is no registered vineyard called Domaine Dubois in Provence, and there are no records of Marcel Dubois being involved in wine production in that region. My heart sank, but I wasn't entirely surprised. What about Brigitte and the Sorbonne? This is even more concerning, Margaret. I checked thoroughly with the literature department, current faculty, retired faculty, visiting professors, adjunct lecturers. I reviewed their employment records going back 25 years. There is no record of Professor Brigitte Dubois ever teaching literature at the Sorbonne. Are you absolutely certain? Maybe she used a different name professionally, or maybe she worked part-time, or maybe she taught at a different university in Paris. I was very thorough, Margaret. I checked the Sorbonne, École Normale Supérieure, University of Paris, and even some smaller colleges in the Paris suburbs. If she had taught French literature at any major institution in Paris, there would be some record of it. I felt like the room was spinning. Catherine, what should I do with this information? I don't know, but I would be extremely careful. Either this family is using completely false identities, or Pierre has been lying to your daughter about fundamental aspects of his background. Neither scenario suggests good intentions. I can't tell Emma this right before she meets his parents. She'll think I'm trying to sabotage their relationship out of jealousy or overprotectiveness. Maybe you should wait and see what you think of them in person. But Margaret, be very careful. And if your instincts tell you something is wrong, trust them. After the call with Catherine, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, trying to process what I'd learned. Pierre had lied to Emma about his family's background. But why? And what else had he lied about? I realized I couldn't confront Emma directly without more evidence. She was so happy, so in love, so convinced she'd finally found her perfect partner. If I told her the information about Pierre's family was fabricated, she'd demand proof, and then probably accuse me of trying to ruin their relationship. But I also knew I couldn't just sit back and let Emma make a potentially catastrophic decision based on lies. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I would keep my knowledge of French secret during dinner with Pierre's parents. I would listen carefully to everything they said when they thought they could speak freely and gather whatever evidence I could about who they really were and what they wanted. I had no idea that this decision would expose a criminal conspiracy that went far beyond simple lies about family background. The week before the dinner was one of the most stressful of my life. I tried to act normal around Emma, while internally preparing for what felt like a battle for my daughter's future. I threw myself into planning what I hoped would be a perfect French dinner, both to show respect for their supposed culture and to create an environment where Pierre's family might feel comfortable enough to speak freely in French around David and me. I settled on a traditional French menu: French onion soup for the appetizer, coq au vin for the main course, and a selection of French cheeses and tarte tatin for dessert. I spent hours researching recipes, sourcing the best ingredients, and practicing my cooking skills to make sure everything would be perfect. More importantly, I spent time mentally preparing for the performance ahead. I needed to act like a typical monolingual American mother: friendly, welcoming, but completely unable to understand French. I practiced responding to French conversations with the kind of polite bewilderment that someone shows when hearing a foreign language they don't understand. I also thought about how to observe and listen without arousing suspicion. I needed to pay attention to their body language, their interactions with each other, and especially their conversations in French when they thought David and I couldn't understand them. As the dinner approached, David became increasingly nervous about the language barrier. "Margaret, this really worries me," he said as we discussed the evening's plans. "How are we going to get to know them or make a good impression if we can't communicate properly?" "Pierre will translate for us," I assured him. "And honestly, sometimes you can learn a lot about people just by watching how they interact with each other and with Emma." "But what if we seem rude or ignorant? I don't want Emma's future in-laws to think we're typical Americans who don't know anything about the rest of the world." David's concern was touching and understandable, but it also reinforced my decision to hide my French knowledge. If David knew I spoke French fluently, he would expect me to facilitate communication and bridge cultural gaps. By concealing my abilities, I could be free to observe and listen without being called upon to act as translator. 2 days before the dinner, Emma called me with additional details about the evening that made me even more concerned. "Mum, Pierre's parents are so excited to meet you and Dad. But Pierre said they want to discuss some important things with us related to the wedding and my move to France. What kinds of things? Mainly practical issues. They want to help us figure out the legal requirements for marriage in France, the visa process for me, and they're offering help with some financial aspects of moving abroad. Financial aspects. The phrase sent chills down my spine, especially given what I'd learned about the family's fabricated background. What kind of financial help? Pierre says his family has business connections throughout Europe that could help me find work in Paris, and they're offering to let me invest in their family vineyard to provide financial security for the future. Invest how? I'm not sure of all the details yet, but Pierre says the vineyard is expanding and family members can purchase shares that provide both ownership and guaranteed income. He says it would be a great way to use Grandma's inheritance as a stable and profitable investment. Every alarm bell in my head was going off at full volume. They wanted access to Emma's inheritance. This was looking less like a romance and more like an elaborate financial scam. Emma, have you transferred any money for this investment yet? Not yet. But Pierre helped me set up an international banking account to make transfers easier when we're in France. He says French banking regulations are complicated for Americans, so it's better to get everything organized in advance. She'd already opened an international bank account on Pierre's advice. How much detail had she shared with them about her financial situation? Honey, have you shared details about your inheritance or savings with Pierre? Of course, Mum. We're planning to get married and build a life together. We need to be honest with each other about our financial situations so we can plan everything properly. And what did you tell him? Just the basics. The amount Grandma left me, my savings account balance, my 401k, things like that. Pierre was really impressed with how well I manage my money. He says most Americans our age don't have nearly as much financial discipline. I felt sick. Emma had provided Pierre with detailed information about her financial assets, opened an international bank account on his advice, and was now being invited to invest her inheritance in a family business that, according to my research, didn't exist. Emma, I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't make any major financial decisions or transfer any money until after we meet Pierre's parents and can discuss everything as a family. Mom, you're starting to sound paranoid. Pierre isn't trying to steal my money. He loves me. I'm not saying he's trying to steal anything, honey. I'm just saying that important financial decisions should never be made in a rush, especially when they involve moving to another country and investing in an unfamiliar business. Promise me you'll wait until we can all discuss this together. Fine, I promise. But Mum, I hope you'll give Pierre and his family a fair chance. I've never been this happy, and I don't want family drama to ruin everything. I promise to give them an absolutely fair chance, Emma. I just want to make sure we're all making the right decisions with complete information. After that conversation, I realized that Saturday's dinner wasn't just about meeting Emma's future in-laws. It was about gathering evidence that might save my daughter from financial ruin and possibly much worse. I spent the next 2 days rehearsing my role as a monolingual American mother while internally preparing for the most important undercover operation of my life. Saturday evening arrived with the cool crispness of early October. I'd been cooking all day, and the house was filled with the rich aromas of coq au vin, French onion soup, and tarte tatin. I'd set the dining room table with our finest china, silver, and crystal. the kind we usually only used for Christmas and special anniversaries. Emma arrived at 6:30, literally glowing with excitement and carrying a bottle of what appeared to be very expensive wine. "Mum, this is wine from Pierre's family vineyard," she said, holding up the bottle. "Pierre wanted you and Dad to try their wine. He says this is one of their special reserve bottles that they usually only drink within the family." I looked at the label. Domaine du Bois, Cuvée Spéciale, Provence. It looked authentic and professional, but knowing what I now knew about the family's fictional background, I suspected it was either a fake label or ordinary wine that had been relabeled. "How thoughtful of them," I said, taking the bottle. "We'll definitely open it with dinner." "Mum, I have to tell you, I'm so nervous. I want tonight to go perfectly. Pierre's parents mean everything to him, and their approval is so important for our future together." I understood how much this evening meant to Emma, and it made my plans even more complicated. But I also knew that if my suspicions were correct, tonight might be my only chance to gather the evidence needed to save her. "Honey, just be yourself. If they love Pierre and Pierre loves you, they'll love you too." At exactly 7 o'clock, we heard a car pull up to our house. Through the front window, I could see a black BMW sedan. Expensive, but not flashy. Pierre got out from the driver's seat and opened the rear doors for his parents with formal courtesy that seemed slightly performative. Marcel Dubois was exactly as Emma had described, a distinguished man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in what was obviously a very expensive suit. He moved with the confidence that comes with wealth and high social standing. Brigitte was elegant and sophisticated, wearing designer clothes and jewelry that probably cost more than David's monthly salary. But as I watched them approach our front door, something felt off. Their interactions seemed too formal, too rehearsed. Marcel's hand on Brigitte's elbow as they walked up our front steps looked more like a business partner guiding a colleague than a husband helping his wife. Emma opened the door before they could knock, and Pierre immediately stepped forward with a warm smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, may I present my parents, Marcel and Brigitte Dubois. Maman, Papa, these are Emma's parents, David and Margaret Collins." Marcel stepped forward with a slight bow that seemed both respectful and condescending. "Monsieur et Madame Collins, nous sommes enchantés de faire votre connaissance." Then, in accented but excellent English, "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, we are delighted to meet you." Brigitte smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Thank you so much for welcoming us into your beautiful home. We have heard wonderful things about you from our Pierre." Their English was perfect. Too perfect, I thought. Most French people who spoke English as a second language had more noticeable accents or made small grammatical errors. These two sounded like they might be native English speakers affecting French accents. "Please, come in," David said, clearly doing his best to be gracious despite his nervousness. "We're so happy to meet you. Emma has told us wonderful things about your family." As we moved into the living room, I watched carefully how the three of them interacted. Pierre was attentive to his parents, but there was something performative about it, like he was playing the role of a dutiful son rather than actually being one. Marcel and Brigitte, meanwhile, seemed to be studying our house, taking in details about our furnishings, artwork, and family photos with an intensity that felt more like appraisal than curiosity. "Your home is lovely," Brigitte said, settling gracefully onto our sofa. "So warm and welcoming. It reminds me of American films about family life. The comment struck me as odd. Why would someone who supposedly taught literature at the Sorbonne reference American films rather than American literature when complimenting our home? Pierre sat next to Emma on the love seat, holding her hand with obvious affection. Emma has told me so much about her childhood here. It sounds like she had a wonderful upbringing. We tried our best, David said modestly. Emma was always such a bright, motivated child. We're very proud of the woman she's become. As you should be, Marcel said, his accent seeming to shift slightly as he spoke. Pierre tells us she is very accomplished in her career and very, how do you say, financially responsible. Another red flag. The hesitation over financially responsible seemed fake, like someone pretending to search for English words they actually knew perfectly well. Can I offer you something to drink? I asked, playing my role as the gracious hostess. Wine, perhaps. Emma brought a bottle from your vineyard that we'd love to share. That would be lovely, Brigitte said. Marcel is very proud of our wine. It has been in the family for many generations. As David went to open the wine, I excused myself to check on dinner. But really I wanted a moment to process what I was observing. Everything about this family felt wrong. Their too perfect English, their overly formal interactions, the way they seemed to be studying our home and our responses to them. When I returned to the living room, they were engaged in conversation about Pierre and Emma's relationship. I caught the tail end of Marcel saying something about the practical considerations of international marriage. We want to make sure Emma understands all the complexities, Brigitte was saying. Moving to France, the visa process, establishing financial security there. It can be overwhelming for Americans who aren't familiar with European systems. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, settling back into my chair. Emma mentioned that you might be able to help with some of these practical matters. Pierre nodded enthusiastically. My parents have many connections throughout Europe. They can help Emma find employment opportunities in Paris, and they've offered to let her invest in our family business to provide long-term financial stability. The vineyard investment sounds fascinating, David said as he poured wine for everyone. How does that work exactly? Marcel's eyes lit up with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. Ah, it is a wonderful opportunity. The vineyard is expanding, purchasing additional land in Provence. Family members and close friends can buy shares that provide both ownership in the property and guaranteed annual returns based on wine sales and land appreciation. What kind of returns? I asked innocently. Typically 15 to 20% annually, Brigitte said smoothly. Wine is a very stable investment in France, especially in established regions like Provence. The land values continue to increase, and our wines have been winning awards throughout Europe. 15 to 20% annual returns on a wine investment. Any legitimate financial advisor would recognize this as impossible unless the business was incredibly high risk. This was sounding more and more like a classic investment scam. That sounds amazing, Emma said, squeezing Pierre's hand. Much better than the returns I'm getting on my regular investments. How much would someone typically invest in something like this? David asked. Pierre and his parents exchanged a quick glance. It depends on the investor's situation, Pierre said carefully. The minimum investment is usually around $50,000, but for family members, we can be more flexible. $50,000 minimum. They were targeting Emma's inheritance specifically. Well, let's eat, I said, standing up. Dinner should be ready. As we moved to the dining room, I noticed Marcel and Brigitte speaking quietly to each other in what sounded like French, but I couldn't quite catch the words. Once we were seated around the table, with David at the head, me across from him, and Pierre's family on one side with Emma on the other, the conversation became more relaxed. The food was perfect. The coq au vin tender and flavorful, the French onion soup rich and aromatic. Marcel and Brigitte complimented everything enthusiastically, and I found myself almost forgetting my suspicions as we fell into pleasant dinner conversation. Then Marcel said something that made my blood freeze. Brigitte, passe-moi le sel, s'il te plaît. Cette femme cuisine bien, mais elle est trop généreuse avec les herbes. Brigitte, pass me the salt, please. This woman cooks well, but she's too generous with the herbs. I kept my face perfectly neutral, continuing to eat while my heart pounded. They thought David and I couldn't understand them, and they were already making casual, slightly critical comments about my cooking in French. Le fils aussi semble un peu simple, Brigitte replied quietly. Il ne pose pas les bonnes questions sur l'investissement. The son also seems a bit simple. He's not asking the right questions about the investment. My hands were shaking slightly, but I managed to keep eating and smiling. They were talking about David like he was stupid, and they were discussing the investment as if it were definitely going to happen. Pierre was engaged in animated conversation with Emma about their future plans in Paris, translating occasional comments from his parents, but clearly not translating their actual French conversation. Pierre tells us you inherited a significant amount from your grandmother, Marcel said to Emma during a lull in the conversation. That must provide wonderful security for your future together. It does, Emma said. I've been very careful with the money, investing most of it conservatively. But Pierre's family investment opportunity sounds like it could provide much better returns. Oh, it will, Brigitte said confidently. We have many American investors who are very happy with their returns. Young women especially seem to appreciate the security it provides. Young women especially. Another warning sign. They were targeting a specific demographic. As David cleared the dinner plates, Marcel leaned back in his chair and said to Brigitte in French, Elle est parfaite. Jeune, naïve, récemment héritée, et émotionnellement vulnérable après ses échecs romantiques précédents. Pierre a bien choisi. She's perfect, young, naive, recently inherited, and emotionally vulnerable after her previous romantic failures. Pierre chose well. I nearly choked on my wine. They knew about Emma's previous relationships and were specifically targeting her emotional vulnerabilities. This wasn't a coincidence. They had researched her and identified her as an ideal victim. Brigitte nodded and replied, Et les parents sont exactement comme prévu. Bourgeois américains typiques. Trop polis pour poser des questions difficiles. Impressions par notre sophistication européenne présumée. And the parents are exactly as expected. Typical American bourgeois, too polite to ask difficult questions, impressed by our supposed European sophistication. My face felt like it was on fire, but I managed to keep smiling and nodding as Pierre told us about the apartment he'd found for them in Paris. Combien d'argent pensez-vous que nous pouvons obtenir d'elle? Marcel asked quietly. How much money do you think we can get from her? Au moins 150,000, Brigitte replied. Peut-être plus si nous jouons bien nos cartes. Elle fait confiance à Pierre implicitement maintenant. At least 150,000. Maybe more if we play our cards right. She trusts Pierre implicitly now. I felt sick. They were planning to steal at least $150,000 from my daughter, possibly more, and Emma trusted Pierre completely. Et après, Marcel continued, retournons-nous au plan habituel? And afterwards, do we return to the usual plan? Bien sûr, Pierre interjected quietly in French, having apparently heard his father's question. Une fois que nous avons l'argent, nous disparaissons. Elle ne pourra jamais nous retrouver en France puisque nos identités sont fausses. Of course. Once we have the money, we disappear. She'll never be able to find us in France since our identities are fake. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. This was a complete scam. They were planning to take Emma's money and disappear, leaving her heartbroken and financially ruined in a foreign country where she wouldn't be able to find them because they were using false identities. Emma, Brigitte said sweetly, switching back to English. Pierre tells us you're excited about the investment opportunity. When were you thinking of making the initial transfer? Well, Emma said, glancing at me, I promised my parents we'd discuss it as a family first, but I'm definitely interested. Of course, family approval is important, Marcel said, but you should know that this particular opportunity is time-sensitive. We have other investors interested, and the window for purchasing these shares closes next week. Classic pressure tactics. Create artificial urgency to prevent the victim from thinking too carefully about the decision. Next week? Emma looked worried. That doesn't give us much time to... Perhaps we could help facilitate the discussion, Pierre suggested. My parents could explain the technical details to your parents, answer any questions they might have. That would be wonderful, Emma said, looking relieved. As we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, Marcel and Brigitte continued their French commentary, apparently convinced that David and I were completely oblivious. Ces Américains sont si prévisibles, Brigitte murmured as she admired our family photos. Toujours impressionnée par les accents européens et les histoires de vieilles familles. These Americans are so predictable, always impressed by European accents and stories of old families. Et ils ne vérifient jamais rien, Marcel added. Ils acceptent tout ce qu'on leur dit sur la confiance. And they never verify anything. They accept everything we tell them on trust. I was learning more about their operation with every comment. They relied on Americans being too polite to fact-check their stories and too impressed by European sophistication to be suspicious. As we settled in the living room with dessert, Pierre pulled out a tablet and began showing Emma and David materials about the vineyard investment. The presentation looked professional, with beautiful photos of vineyards, charts showing projected returns, and testimonials from supposed investors. But I noticed that the photos looked like the same stock images I'd found online, and the testimonials used only first names and initials, no way to verify them. As you can see, Pierre was explaining, the investment has been performing exceptionally well. These investors have been with us for several years and continue to increase their investments. Marcel was watching David's reaction carefully. The beauty of this investment is that it provides both immediate income and long-term appreciation. Unlike American stock markets, which can be so volatile, French wine and land investments are extremely stable. It does look impressive, David said, though I could hear some uncertainty in his voice. What kind of documentation would Emma receive? Ownership papers, account statements, that sort of thing. Another quick glance between the three conspirators. Everything is handled through our family's private banking arrangements in France, Brigitte explained. Much more discreet than American banking and more favorable tax treatment for international investors. Translation: no documentation that could be traced or verified. Emma would receive quarterly statements and annual reports, Pierre added. But the actual ownership documents are held in trust by our family lawyers in France, which provides additional legal protection. Translation: Emma would never receive any real documentation proving her investment. As the evening continued, I listened to more French conversations that revealed the scope of their operation. They mentioned other clients in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. They discussed coordination with other teams working similar scams in different cities. This wasn't just a small-time fraud. This was an organized criminal network operating across multiple countries. Quand partez-vous pour la prochaine ville? Brigitte asked Pierre quietly. When do you leave for the next city? Dans 2 semaines, si tout se passe comme prévu avec elle, Pierre replied. Boston ensuite, puis peut-être Miami. In 2 weeks, if everything goes as planned with her. Boston next, then maybe Miami. They were planning to leave Chicago in 2 weeks, presumably after they'd gotten Emma's money. Then they'd move on to their next target in Boston. Et la fille de Seattle, avez-vous eu des nouvelles? Marcel asked. And the girl from Seattle, have you heard anything? Elle est toujours en train d'essayer de nous retrouver, Pierre said with what sounded like amusement. Mais bien sûr, elle ne peut pas. Nous n'existons pas. She's still trying to find us. But of course she can't. We don't exist. My blood ran cold. There was another victim in Seattle who was still trying to track them down. How many women had they done this to? As the evening wound down and we prepared to say goodbye, I knew I had to act quickly. In just 2 weeks, they planned to disappear with Emma's money and move on to their next victim. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening, Brigitte said as they prepared to leave. We hope to see you again soon. Before Emma makes her final decision about the investment, Marcel added meaningfully. After they left, Emma was practically glowing with excitement. Mom, Dad, what did you think? Aren't they wonderful? And the investment opportunity sounds amazing. David looked thoughtful. They seem very nice, honey, though I have to say some of their explanations about the investment were a bit vague. That's just because it's complicated, Emma said. Pierre said he could walk us through all the technical details tomorrow if we want. That might be a good idea, I said carefully, before you make any major financial decisions. That night, after Emma had gone home and David was asleep, I sat at my computer and began documenting everything I'd heard. I wrote down every French conversation I could remember, every detail about their operation, every lie they'd told. Then I began researching what I could do with this information. I needed to find a way to expose them without putting Emma in danger, and I needed to do it fast. The next morning, I called Catherine in Paris. Catherine, it's Margaret. I need your help urgently. What's happened? Those people I asked you to research. They're not who they claim to be, and they're running an investment scam targeting my daughter. I have evidence, but I need to know how to use it. Tell me everything. I spent an hour explaining what I'd overheard, the details of their scam, and their plans to disappear in 2 weeks. Margaret, this sounds like a sophisticated international fraud operation. You need to contact the FBI immediately. They have teams that specialize in international financial crimes. But what about Emma? If I expose them, she'll be heartbroken. She really believes she loves Pierre. Better heartbroken than financially ruined and emotionally destroyed. These people are professional predators, Margaret. They've probably done this to dozens of women. That afternoon, I called the FBI's Chicago field office and spoke with Agent Sarah Chen, who specialized in international fraud cases. Mrs. Collins, based on what you're telling me, this sounds like a classic romance scam operation. These groups often work in teams, using fake identities to target vulnerable individuals with inheritance money or high-paying jobs. How many people do they typically victim? The sophisticated operations can have dozens of victims across multiple cities and countries. The total losses often reach into the millions of dollars. What can we do to stop them? We need you to help us gather evidence. Are you willing to wear a recording device at your next meeting with them? The thought terrified me, but I knew I had to do it. Yes, if it will stop them from hurting Emma and other women. Over the next few days, I worked with the FBI to plan a sting operation. They wanted me to invite Pierre's family back for another dinner, during which I would wear a hidden recording device to capture their conversations in French. The hardest part was keeping this from Emma, who was growing more excited about her future with Pierre every day. She had already started researching apartments in Paris and looking into transferring her job to the European division of her company. "Mum, I'm so happy," she told me during one of our coffee dates. "I never thought I'd find someone who accepts me exactly as I am. Pierre loves my ambition, my intelligence, my independence. He's not threatened by my success. He celebrates it." It broke my heart to know that everything she felt for Pierre was based on lies. But I also knew that Agent Chen was right. Better heartbroken than destroyed. The second dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. This time, I invited them over for a more casual evening, saying that David and I wanted to discuss the investment opportunity in more detail. They accepted eagerly, probably sensing that their payday was approaching. On Saturday evening, I was fitted with a tiny recording device by FBI technicians. Agent Chen and her team were positioned in surveillance vehicles around our neighborhood, ready to move in when they had enough evidence. The dinner started much like the first one, with polite conversation in English and the family putting on their sophisticated European act. But as the evening progressed and they became more comfortable, their French conversations became more revealing. "Elle va signer les papiers demain," Pierre told his parents quietly. "She's going to sign the papers tomorrow." "Parfait," Marcel replied. "Combien pouvons-nous obtenir d'elle pour le premier transfert?" "Perfect. How much can we get from her for the first transfer?" 95 000 pour commencer, Pierre said. "Elle pensait que c'est juste le premier versement, mais bien sûr, ce sera le seul." 95,000 to start. She thinks it's just the first installment, but of course, it will be the only one. "Et après, nous disparaissons comme d'habitude?" Brigitte asked. "And then we disappear as usual?" "Bien sûr. Dans 3 jours, nous serons en route vers Boston. Elle ne nous reverra jamais." "Of course. In 3 days we'll be on our way to Boston. She'll never see us again." As the evening continued, they revealed more details about their operation. They discussed their coordinator who arranged false identities and banking accounts. They mentioned specific victims by first name and the amounts they'd stolen from each. They talked about their training in psychological manipulation and how to identify vulnerable targets. Cette fille était trop facile, Marcel said at one point, referring to Emma. Récemment sortie de relations ratés, héritière, émotionnellement affamée d'approbation, nous aurions pu demander plus. This girl was too easy. Recently out of failed relationships, inherited money, emotionally starved for approval. We could have asked for more. By the end of the evening, we had recorded enough evidence to expose the entire operation. As they prepared to leave, promising to finalize the investment paperwork the next day, I knew it was the last time I would see them as free people. The FBI arrested all three of them the next morning at their hotel. Pierre was in Emma's apartment at the time, supposedly helping her prepare the wire transfer, when agents arrived there as well. Emma was devastated. The man she thought she loved, the future she thought she was building, the family she thought she was joining, all of it was a carefully constructed lie designed to steal her money and break her heart. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of their operation. Pierre Dubois wasn't even his real name. He was actually Robert Martinez, a con artist from Miami with a history of financial fraud. Marcel and Brigitte were professional grifters who had been running similar scams for over a decade. They had stolen more than $20 million from 46 women across the United States and Europe. Emma would have been victim number 47. The fake vineyard, the phony university credentials, the sophisticated European personas, all of it was part of a carefully crafted con designed to exploit American women's romanticized notions of European culture and sophisticated older families. Emma struggled with depression and trust issues for months after the arrest. She blamed herself for being naive, for wanting so badly to find love that she ignored warning signs. "How could I have been so stupid, Mom?" she asked me during one of our many long conversations about what had happened. "You weren't stupid, honey. You were human. These people are professionals who study how to manipulate human emotions and desires. They knew exactly what you wanted to hear and how to make you feel special and loved." But I should have known something was wrong. The timeline was so fast, the investment opportunity was too good to be true. "Sweetheart, they've been perfecting this con for years. They know how to make everything seem legitimate, how to apply just the right amount of pressure, how to make their targets feel like they're in control of the decisions while actually being manipulated every step of the way." It took Emma almost a year to fully recover from the emotional trauma of the experience. She went to therapy, leaned on her family and friends for support, and gradually rebuilt her confidence and trust in her own judgment. The trial was extensive, with dozens of victims testifying about how they'd been deceived and financially destroyed. The FBI's investigation revealed that the ring had been operating for over 10 years, with different teams working in different regions and countries. All three of the con artists were sentenced to lengthy federal prison terms. The court ordered them to pay restitution to their victims, though most of the stolen money had been hidden in offshore accounts and was never recovered. During the trial, I learned more about how they had targeted Emma specifically. They had researched her online presence, her job, her family, even her romantic history through social media and dating apps. They knew about her grandmother's death and inheritance before Pierre ever accidentally bumped into her at the coffee shop. Emma's encounter with Pierre wasn't a meet-cute romance. It was a carefully planned attack by predators who had identified her as an ideal victim. The experience changed Emma in many ways, but not all of them were negative. She became more cautious about new relationships, but also more confident in her own worth. She realized that she didn't need to change herself to find love. She needed to find someone who appreciated her exactly as she was. 2 years after the trial, Emma met David Kim, a different David, at a professional conference. He was a fellow consultant who was impressed by her presentation on international market strategies. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared professional interests. David Kim loved Emma's ambition, supported her career goals, and never asked her to make herself smaller to accommodate his ego. When he proposed 2 years later, he included a clause in his proposal speech about how he wanted to build a life that would help both of them achieve their dreams. I learned from the Pierre experience that I was looking for love in the wrong ways, Emma told me before her wedding to David Kim. I was so focused on finding someone who wouldn't be intimidated by my success that I forgot to look for someone who would celebrate it. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most important thing a parent can do is trust their instincts, even when it means going to extraordinary lengths to protect their child. My decision to hide my French language skills and eavesdrop on conversations I wasn't supposed to understand probably saved Emma from financial ruin and emotional devastation. The case also taught me about the sophisticated nature of modern fraud operations. These aren't the crude email scams that most people imagine when they think of financial fraud. These are carefully orchestrated psychological operations run by people who understand human nature and know exactly how to exploit our deepest desires for love, security, and acceptance. Emma keeps in touch with some of the other victims from the case. They've formed a support group that helps women who have been targeted by romance scams. She also speaks at conferences about financial fraud prevention, sharing her story to help others recognize the warning signs. The hardest part, Emma often tells audiences, was accepting that someone could fake loving me so convincingly. But I learned that real love doesn't come with artificial timelines, pressure to make major life changes immediately, or requests for money or financial information. Today, Emma is happily married to David Kim, working as a partner at her consulting firm, and using her experience to help protect other women from similar scams. She credits my language skills and willingness to go undercover with saving her from becoming another statistic in the growing problem of international romance fraud. But more than that, she learned that she was already enough exactly as she was. She didn't need to change herself or diminish her accomplishments to find love. She just needed to find the right person who would appreciate everything that made her who she was. As for Pierre, Robert, or whatever his real name was, he's serving 15 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about the lives he destroyed in pursuit of easy money. But mostly I just feel grateful that my daughter's story had a different ending than the 46 women who came before her. My name is Margaret Collins. I speak French fluently. And sometimes a mother's instincts combined with hidden language skills are exactly what's needed to save your child from predators who mistake politeness for stupidity and trust for weakness. If you're listening to this and something feels wrong about a relationship that seems too good to be true, trust that feeling. Love shouldn't come with a price tag, artificial deadlines, or requests for your financial information. Real love gives you time to think, space to verify, and the freedom to make decisions without pressure. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is pretend you don't understand what their predators are really saying while you gather the evidence needed to expose them.